For decades, Malcolm X was introduced to the public through a single, dangerous label, a man of hate. Newspapers repeated it, television reinforced it, and many people accepted it without ever listening to what he actually said. But in this rare 1963 City Desk interview, Malcolm X calmly dismantles that narrative, piece by piece. He makes one thing unmistakably clear from the start: the Nation of Islam does not teach hatred toward white people. Instead, it teaches opposition to social evils, poverty, addiction, moral decay, and the loss of dignity forced onto black communities. Malcolm doesn't shout. He doesn't threaten. He explains. And that is exactly what made him so unsettling to the media of his time. What you're about to hear is not the caricature history often presents. It's a disciplined, articulate voice demanding self-respect, self-reliance, and truth. Malcolm points to Muslim-run businesses that serve both black and white customers, arguing that dignity and fairness are not slogans, but daily practices. His message challenges a deeper question. Why is black self-determination so often mistaken for hostility? This interview exposes how narratives are constructed not to inform, but to control perception. Malcolm refuses to let others define his words or his people. He redirects every accusation back to lived reality, unequal treatment, distorted headlines, and a society more comfortable judging tone than confronting injustice. As this story unfolds, listen closely not just to what Malcolm X says, but to how calmly he says it. Because, sometimes, the most powerful challenge to a false narrative isn't anger, it's clarity. If this kind of history matters to you, if you want stories that go beyond headlines and dig into the truth, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us. What comes next may change how you see far more than just the past. As Malcolm X continues speaking, the conversation moves from accusations of hatred to something far more personal and unsettling: the question of identity itself. Having already stripped away the false narrative that his movement is driven by hostility, he turns to a word so familiar that most people rarely stop to question it. Yet to Malcolm, this word carries the full weight of history, control, and loss. When he challenges the term Negro, he is not arguing over language for the sake of semantics. He is exposing how power reshapes identity long after chains are removed. Malcolm explains that the word did not emerge from science, culture, or shared human understanding. It was created and enforced during slavery, attached to people as a label of ownership rather than belonging. In his telling, it functioned less like a description and more like a tag, separating those who had been stripped of political rights, economic standing, and historical memory from the rest of society. The term survived emancipation not because it reflected truth, but because it was convenient for a system that preferred continuity over justice. What makes his argument resonate is how calmly he presents it. He points out that black people from Africa arriving in the United States were not originally called Negroes until they were folded into the same social category as descendants of enslaved people. The word, he explains, did not describe skin color, culture, or origin. It described a condition: being cut off from power, from self-definition, and from recognized humanity. By framing it this way, Malcolm reveals how language can quietly preserve the structure of inequality even as laws begin to change. This moment connects directly to the broader theme of the interview, the refusal to let outside forces define black life. Just as Malcolm rejects the media's portrayal of the Nation of Islam as a movement of hatred, he also rejects a name imposed by those who once claimed ownership over black bodies. Both, in his view, are tools of distortion. One reshapes public perception, the other reshapes personal identity. Together, they limit how black people are allowed to see themselves and how others are taught to see them. Malcolm's discussion of names deepens this point. He explains that many black families carry surnames inherited from enslavers, not ancestors. These names, passed down through generations, serve as quiet reminders of a history in which people were catalogued as property. Reclaiming identity, then, is not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let that past dictate the future. For Malcolm, Rejecting imposed labels is an act of restoration, a way of recovering dignity that was deliberately taken. This is why his argument unsettles those listening. It challenges the assumption that progress means acceptance into existing categories rather than questioning who created them and why. Malcolm suggests that true self-respect cannot grow from borrowed definitions, especially when those definitions were forged in exploitation. His message is not about exclusion or superiority, but about honesty, about understanding how deeply history shapes the present and how freedom begins with naming oneself. By the time he finishes this part of the interview, it becomes clear that the struggle he describes is not only political or economic. It is psychological and cultural. If a people accept a label rooted in their dehumanization, they may also accept the limits that come with it. Malcolm's insistence on redefining identity is therefore inseparable from his call for self-determination. Without control over language, there can be no control over destiny. In this way, the conversation circles back to where it began. Just as Malcolm refuses the false charge of hatred, he refuses a false name. Both rejections serve the same purpose: breaking free from narratives imposed by others and opening space for a future shaped by self-respect, clarity, and truth. With identity reclaimed and false narratives stripped away, Malcolm X guides the conversation toward what he sees as the true purpose of the movement behind him. Having already rejected labels imposed by history and media alike, he now explains what replaces them. The Nation of Islam, as he presents it, is not built on protest for its own sake, nor on emotional reaction to injustice. It is built on structure, on discipline, on the belief that freedom cannot be handed down by the same systems that once denied it. Malcolm speaks of freedom, justice, and equality not as abstract ideals, but as conditions that must be constructed from within. He argues that waiting for acceptance from institutions that were never designed to serve black communities is a fragile strategy, one that leaves dignity dependent on approval rather than strength. Instead, the movement emphasizes self-discipline as the foundation of liberation. Without control over one's habits, one's conduct, and one's direction, no political gain can truly last. Reform, in this sense, begins at the personal level before it can transform the collective. Moral reform plays a central role in this vision, but not in the way critics often assume. Malcolm does not frame morality as judgment imposed on others, but as responsibility embraced by oneself. He speaks of breaking cycles that weaken community's addiction, internal conflict, Cabisims as loss of purpose, and replacing them with standards that reinforce self-respect. In his telling, morality is not about perfection. It is about consistency. It is about living in a way that aligns daily behavior with long-term survival and growth. Economic independence emerges as another pillar of this philosophy. Malcolm points to businesses operated by the movement, not as symbols of separation, but as evidence of capability. Ownership, he argues, changes the relationship between people and power. When communities produce, distribute, and sustain themselves, they are no longer forced to beg for access or fear withdrawal of support. Economic self-reliance becomes a form of quiet leverage, reducing vulnerability while increasing stability. It is not isolation he advocates, but balanced engagement without dependence. Unity, however, is what ties these ideas together. Malcolm repeatedly emphasizes the importance of collective responsibility, stressing that progress cannot be achieved by isolated individuals alone. Fragmentation, he suggests, has long been encouraged because it weakens resistance and erodes trust. Unity does not require uniformity of thought, but it does require shared commitment to uplift, rather than competition for limited approval. In this sense, unity becomes both a strategy and a safeguard, protecting gains from being reversed as soon as attention fades. What makes Malcolm's explanation compelling is how directly it responds to the accusations leveled against him. Those who claim the movement rejects cooperation misunderstand its premise. Malcolm does not argue against coexistence. He argues against dependency. He does not deny the value of broader society. He questions why equality must always be conditional. His vision insists that respect earned through self-sufficiency is more durable than respect requested through appeal. Throughout the interview, Malcolm returns to one underlying idea: that systems rarely reform themselves out of goodwill alone. Change, in his view, comes when those affected develop the capacity to stand firm, with or without permission. This is why the movement prioritizes internal strength over external validation. Approval can be withdrawn. Self-respect, once established, cannot. As the conversation unfolds, it becomes clear that Malcolm is offering more than a political position. He is outlining a method of survival shaped by history but oriented toward the future. Freedom, justice, and equality are not endpoints he expects to reach through patience alone. They are outcomes he believes must be built deliberately, sustained through discipline, and defended through unity. In that framework, reliance gives way to responsibility, and hope is anchored not in promises, but in preparation. As the conversation deepens, Malcolm X turns his focus to the lens through which the world perceives him and his movement, peeling back the layers of distortion that have shaped public understanding for decades. He recounts how the press, eager for sensational stories, has consistently taken his words out of context, transforming moments of insight into symbols of threat. A remark made at a rally, intended to highlight the community's grief and the demand for justice, could be twisted into evidence of malice, while similar statements from white leaders never attract scrutiny. Malcolm illustrates, with unflinching clarity, how selective framing operates, showing that anger expressed by Black Americans is portrayed as dangerous, irrational, and even criminal, while identical or harsher rhetoric from prominent figures of privilege is normalized, excused, or celebrated. This manipulation is not merely a matter of semantics. It is a tool that shapes perception and preserves existing power structures. By controlling the narrative, those in positions of authority dictate which voices are legitimate and which are threatening, which grievances are just and which are subversive. Malcolm observes that this pattern of selective outrage ensures that Black Americans are never judged solely on the content or morality of their arguments, but on the tone, timing, and perceived emotion attached to them. In this way, the media becomes an instrument that amplifies fear while muting the call for systemic change. Malcolm's explanation extends beyond individual incidents, painting a broader picture of inequality in how society values human life and expression. He contrasts the grief for victims in predominantly white communities with the muted response to the brutal killings of unarmed Black individuals, highlighting a stark discrepancy in empathy, urgency, and perceived legitimacy. The press, he argues, does not simply misreport. It codifies a hierarchy of human worth, and in doing so, it amplifies the structural inequities that he and the Nation of Islam seek to confront. Every misrepresentation is both a distraction and a subtle reinforcement of the very systems that perpetuate injustice, shaping public opinion in ways that obscure the need for genuine reform. Yet Malcolm does not dwell on grievance for its own sake. Instead, he demonstrates how misrepresentation reveals the core of his message. The selective outrage exposes the fragility of the narrative that casts his movement as hateful, while ignoring the structural violence endured by Black communities. He points to historical patterns, illustrating that the same language, the same invocation of divine justice, or the same criticism of systemic inequities is tolerated when spoken by white authorities, yet deemed inflammatory when spoken by Black leaders. By contrasting these responses, Malcolm illuminates the biases embedded within institutions, emphasizing that the problem is not what he says, but who is listening, and how they are conditioned to respond. In this light, Malcolm's critique of media distortion ties directly to his broader vision of empowerment. Just as the movement advocates for self-discipline, moral reform, and economic independence, it also seeks to reclaim narrative authority. The ability to define oneself and one's community is inseparable from the ability to protect it from misrepresentation. By exposing these patterns, Malcolm invites his audience to question not only the accuracy of headlines, but the deeper assumptions behind them, recognizing that understanding history, context, and intent is essential to confronting injustice. In effect, the selective framing of his words becomes a case study in the necessity of self-determination, extending from personal identity to collective perception, and ultimately underscoring the enduring need for Black Americans to interpret their own reality rather than relying on a system predisposed to distort it. As the discussion moves deeper into the realities of racial inequality, Malcolm X does not shy away from exposing the hollow gestures that masquerade as progress. He recounts the celebrated moments in the media where a single black student is admitted to a historically white university, lauded as a triumph of justice and equality. To the outside observer, it may appear as a step forward, a symbolic victory for civil rights, but Malcolm strips away the glamour of the headlines to reveal the stark contradiction beneath. While one student is showcased as evidence of change, millions of black Americans continue to live under the weight of systemic oppression, denied access to quality education, economic opportunity, decent and basic rights. In this context, the so-called victory is not merely insufficient. It is an exercise in hypocrisy, a way for institutions and media to claim progress while leaving structural inequities untouched. He illustrates this hypocrisy not with abstract statistics, but with the lived experiences of black communities, describing segregated schools, underfunded neighborhoods, class scenes, and communities trapped in cycles of poverty that are ignored in the celebration of token integration. The achievement of one is held up as a moral triumph, yet it obscures the persistent failures of a society that allows inequality to persist on a massive scale. By highlighting this disparity, Malcolm shifts the focus from spectacle to substance, insisting that true justice cannot be measured by symbolic gestures or isolated events, but by the transformation of systems that continue to oppress millions. In linking this critique to the broader philosophy of the Nation of Islam, Malcolm emphasizes that meaningful change comes from empowerment within the community, not from seeking approval or recognition from institutions that historically denied basic human dignity. He points to the disciplined schools, moral education, and economic initiatives fostered by the movement as tangible examples of real progress, demonstrating that self-determination, collective responsibility, and structured community effort can achieve outcomes that symbolic gestures never will. The integration of one student into a white university pales in comparison to the generation of educated, disciplined, and self-reliant individuals nurtured in environments designed to instill pride, knowledge, and agency. Malcolm also links this critique to media representation, showing how token victories are amplified while the persistent struggle of millions is minimized or ignored. The press, he argues, favors stories that fit comforting narratives of progress rather than those that challenge society to confront systemic failure. By contrast, the Nation of Islam's work focuses on preparing communities to thrive on their own terms, by making education, discipline, and moral development the priority, rather than publicity. In this sense, token integration becomes an illusion of progress, while the real work, the painstaking cultivation of empowered communities, is rendered invisible to the broader public. Through this lens, Malcolm reframes the idea of civil rights from symbolic inclusion to substantive transformation. He challenges viewers to reconsider what constitutes genuine progress and urges an understanding that systemic inequality cannot be overcome through selective representation or isolated victories. By grounding his critique in both lived experience and the practical achievements of the movement, he underscores a central theme of the interview, that freedom, justice, and equality are not concessions to be granted. They are realities to be built through deliberate, disciplined, and collective effort. In rejecting the illusion of token victories, Malcolm X invites his audience to see the depth of the struggle, the urgency of action, and the necessity of self-determined change that addresses the scale of inequity rather than its most visible exceptions. As the interview draws toward its conclusion, Malcolm X turns the focus inward, showing that the struggle for justice and self-determination is not only a collective journey but a deeply personal one. He reflects on the educational programs established by the Nation of Islam, particularly the University of Islam schools, emphasizing their profound impact on both students and the broader community. Unlike many public schools, which struggled with overcrowding, lack of resources, and systemic neglect, these institutions fostered discipline, respect, and a sense of purpose. Malcolm describes how students were taught not only academics, but also moral responsibility, the value of self-respect, and the importance of contributing to their communities. Through these schools, Young Black Americans were equipped with tools to succeed on their own terms, challenging the notion that external validation or approval from a society that had long denied them dignity was necessary for advancement. Malcolm also shares his own journey, recounting a life that began in struggle and marginalization and transformed through the guidance of the Nation of Islam. He speaks candidly about his time in prison, where exposure to Elijah Muhammad's teachings became the turning point that redefined his identity and purpose. For the first time, he experienced a sense of pride in his heritage, clarity in his goals, and discipline in his daily life. This personal transformation was not instantaneous, nor was it simply about adopting religious beliefs. It was about internalizing a framework that demanded responsibility, effort, and a commitment to growth. Through this process, Malcolm became not only a leader within the movement, but also an example of what could be achieved when individuals were empowered to reclaim their dignity and actively shape their futures. By weaving together the achievements of the schools and his own story, Malcolm underscores a central message: liberation and empowerment are built from within. Education, moral discipline, and community unity are not abstract ideals, they are actionable strategies that provide a foundation for sustainable change. The movement, he emphasizes, is not about resentment or hostility. It is about creating environments where Black Americans can thrive, where talent and effort are recognized, and where self-respect is cultivated alongside academic and professional success. In closing, Malcolm reminds us that transformation, whether personal or communal, requires commitment, patience, and unwavering belief in one's own potential. He challenges audiences to see beyond media caricatures and symbolic gestures of progress, urging recognition of the disciplined, principled work being done to uplift individuals and communities alike. His story and the story of the Nation of Islam serve as a testament to the power of education, moral integrity, and self-determination in overcoming historical injustice. Thank you for watching and taking the time to engage with this important history. If you found Malcolm X's insights compelling, inspiring, or thought-provoking, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we continue exploring stories of resilience, empowerment, and truth that are too often overlooked. Your support helps bring these voices and lessons to more people, keeping the conversation alive and ensuring that the lessons of history continue to guide us forward. Lessons of history continue to guide us forward.